सपोर्ट लेवल और रेजिस्टेंस लेवल दोनों आज आपको इन प्लेस दिखाई देंगे। प्री ओपन के रेट से मत जाइए। 21,500 से 21,600 सपोर्ट और 21,763 से 21,813 रेजिस्टेंस। हम रेजिस्टेंस जोन में खुलने की तैयारी कर रहे हैं। इसी में आपको काम करना है बेसिकली, जहां तक निफ्टी की बात है। बैंक निफ्टी यहाँ पर भी रेजिस्टेंस 46,180 पर है, हम 46,165 पर खुल रहे हैं और सपोर्ट 45,500 पर है। तो उसी हिसाब से आपको काम करना है इस समय। पहले 2 घंटे फील्ड ओपन है, उसके बाद मार्केट बजट पर रिएक्ट करेगा, तो उस पर हम काम करेंगे। चलिए खैर, लेकिन अब एक काम करते हैं, अब कुछ और न्यूज भी एड्रेस कर लेते हैं। बजाज ऑटो के सेल्स नंबर्स आ रहे हैं। राहुल, बजाज ऑटो एक शानदार आउट परफॉर्मर रहा है, आपकी कवरेज में है क्या स्टॉक और क्या व्यू होगा इस पर?
नहीं, बिल्कुल है अनुज, एंड आई थिंक सॉरी, इसका सबसे बड़ा फायदा इसका डिविडेंड यील्ड है। आई थिंक इसका और हीरो का व्हेन यू कंपेयर इट टू टीवीएस मोटर्स, आई थिंक 3-3.5% का डिविडेंड यील्ड है। इसके मार्जिन प्रोफाइल जो है वो टीवीएस और हीरो से कहीं ज्यादा है। आई थिंक इट्स अ 20-22% मार्जिन कंपनी। टीवीएस का 10-11% है, हीरो का आई थिंक मिड टीन्स में है या लो टीन्स में है। एक्सपोर्ट मार्केट एक बहुत बड़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी हो जाती है, विच गिव्स इट अ गुड काउंटर बैलेंसिंग फोर्स अगर आपका डोमेस्टिक ठीक नहीं कर रहा। एंड आई थिंक प्रीमियमाइजेशन में अगर आप देखें पिछले 18 महीने में रॉयल एनफील्ड को अच्छी टक्कर दे रहे हैं। आई थिंक, एंड इट्स नॉट जस्ट अबाउट लॉन्चिंग प्रोडक्ट्स अनुज, ये एक कंज्यूमर ब्रांड है। आप एडवर्टाइजिंग में भी क्या कर रहे हैं, आई थिंक दे हैव डन अ वेरी गुड जॉब एट इट। तो आई डोंट थिंक वैल्यूएशंस इतने एक्सपेंसिव हैं अभी भी, बट आई थिंक ये स्टॉक एक ऐसा स्टॉक है अनुज जो हर डिप पे मैं अक्यूमुलेट करना चाहूंगा।
और अब आपके स्क्रीन पर राहुल, शुक्रिया आपके स्टेक के लिए। और ये वो विजुअल्स जिसका इंतजार करते हैं। एक जमाने में एक स्मेक हुआ करती थी अटैची, लेकिन अब होता है टैब। ये लाल टैब वित्त मंत्री इस वक्त उसको लिए खड़े हुए हैं, पूरा का पूरा इस वक्त वित्त मंत्रालय के ऑफिशियल्स, फाइनेंस मिनिस्ट्री के, और इसी में छुपा है वो पूरा का पूरा वक्तव्य, है ना?
बिल्कुल। अच्छा, वो ब्रीफकेस और वो प्रिंटआउट्स बंद हो गए, वो देख के काफी दुख होता था। मतलब
उसका वितरण होता था पूरे के पूरे, अगर आप देखें, है ना?
वो अच्छा है कि
भारी संख्या में बोरियों में आते थे वो, आई थिंक बजट दस्तावेज। अब वो युग चला गया।
बिल्कुल। और काफी आयरॉनिकल है लेकिन कि पेटीएम 20% डाउन है आज वाले दिन में।
हम डिजिटाइजेशन की बात कर रहे हैं और दूसरा one of the pioneers of digitization.
I know. मेरे ख्याल से मैं थोड़ा सा इसमें थोड़ा डिटूर ले रहा हूँ। तो कुछ मुझे लग रहा है कि सीधा बंद कर देना, थोड़ा ऑब्वियसली रेगुलेटर के पास कोई ना कोई रीजन रहे होंगे, लेकिन बेटर ये होता है कि अगर उनके साथ बैठ के थोड़ा सा डिस्कस किया जाता कि क्या तकलीफ है, थोड़ा टाइम दे के अगर वो ठीक किया जाता।
ये ऑल टुगेदर डिफरेंट बिजनेस मॉडल था, सडनली एक बड़ा सेटबैक।
एग्जैक्टली, एक पायनियर कंपनी के लिए। खैर एनीवे, वो आज ऑब्वियसली अगर बजट नहीं होता तो हम उसकी ज्यादा चर्चा करते हैं, लेकिन
अच्छा, अभी बजाज ऑटो की बात हुई थी, प्रकाश सर, लुक एट टाटा मोटर्स। कल जो मैं बात कर रहे थे उनके बारे में, एट 923 आज ऑल टाइम हाई पे खुलेगा टाटा मोटर्स। राय क्या रहेगी
सर? टाटा मोटर्स, ये तो मोटर अब चली है पिछले 2 साल से, तो उसको रोकना तो मुश्किल है, क्योंकि इन्होंने जो क्षमता बढ़ाने के लिए काम किया क्वालिटेटिवली, उसका असर अब आपको नंबर्स में दिख रहा है, उसका असर आपको मार्जिन प्रोफाइल में दिख रहा है, उसमें वॉल्यूम ग्रोथ में, मार्केट शेयर में, हर। और सबसे बड़ा ट्रिगर इसमें आएगा, रिजल्ट्स हैं कल मेरे ख्याल से कि ये आपको मार्च तक नेट डेट फ्री होते हुए दिख जाएंगे। तो जो इतना बड़ा जेएलआर के एक्विजिशन, ये टाइम का ओवरहैंग था कि आपने इतना कर्जा लेके किया काम, और अब वो जस्टिफाई होने लगेगा कि बहुत सही चीज की थी। तो आई थिंक इसकी री रेटिंग अंडरवे है। 1000 रुपए तो बनता है, क्योंकि एक साइकोलॉजिकल मार्क हो गया, बट आई थिंक मैं तो काफी टाइम से इस पे बुलिश हूँ। पहले डर लग रहा था कि ये जब 550-600 आया, लेकिन 700 के बाद से और कन्विक्शन इसलिए आया कि न्यूज फ्लो वैसा आने लगा है, सपोर्ट कर रही है हर चीज इसके मूव के लिए। सो आई थिंक वी आर क्वाइट पॉजिटिवली पोजीशन।
अच्छा, देखिए, मिड कैप इंडेक्स रिकॉर्ड हाई पे शुरुआत कर रहा है, तो उस पर ध्यान रखिएगा। राहुल, कल मैं एक रिपोर्ट पढ़ रहा था वेस्ट लाइफ के बारे में, सरप्राइजिंगली वीक। आपका क्या टेक रहा है उस पर?
नो कंसर्न्स अनुज, बिकॉज बेस बहुत हाई था। आई थिंक वो आप ऑप्टिकली आप नंबर देखेंगे तो आपको खराब लगेगा, लेकिन आप पिछले आई थिंक 5-6 साल का डेटा उठा के देख लीजिए अनुज, और लेट्स कंपेयर इट टू द मार्केट लीडर विच इज जुबिलेंट। जुबिलेंट इज प्रेडोमिनेटली अ डाइन-इन बिजनेस। अगर आप पिछले 30 क्वार्टर का, और ये छोटा टाइम फ्रेम नहीं दे रहा हूँ, डेटा उठा के देख लेंगे, वेस्ट लाइफ बीइंग प्रेडोमिनेटली अ डाइन-इन प्लेयर हैज आउटपरफॉर्म जुबिलेंट इन टर्म्स ऑफ सेम स्टोर सेल्स ग्रोथ। इनके रिटर्न, इनका ग्रॉस मार्जिन अनुज अगर आप देखेंगे, आप रिजल्ट्स देख रहे थे, ग्रॉस मार्जिन अब जुबिलेंट के टक्कर में आ गया है, विच इज रिमार्केबल। ये कंपनी 4 साल पहले तक नेगेटिव रिटर्न रेशियोज में थी, आज 20% रिटर्न ऑन इक्विटी और कैपिटल एम्प्लॉयड है। तो आई इवन इफ द स्टॉक ओपन्स लोअर, आई थिंक अगर ये आपको, मैं तो चाहता हूं, मैं बहुत टाइम से चाह रहा था कि 750 का भाव आ जाए ताकि ये एक अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल जाए, क्योंकि ये 250 से 1050 एक लीनियर फैशन में चला गया था। देखिए अनुज, इसमें इतना कंपटीशन भी नहीं आया। टू बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट अनुज, आई थिंक अगर आप क्यूएसआर स्पेस देख रहे हैं ना, तो आई पर्सनली थिंक जुबिलेंट अगर आप एंटर कर रहे हैं, ये बेसिकली एक ट्रेडिंग स्टॉक बन चुका है। आई डोंट सी अ स्ट्रक्चरल, वो maybe I'm making a very controversial statement, but I've discussed this with you in the past. I think पिछले 1-1.5 साल से कि जुबिलेंट फूडवर्क्स की स्टोरी खत्म हो चुकी है। जो सॉरी यस प्लीज,
बस मैं आ रहा हूं आपके पास वापस। मार्केट ओपनिंग होने वाली है, तो मार्केट ओपनिंग की तरफ चलते हैं। अब सिर्फ 5 सेकंड बचे हैं मार्केट ओपनिंग में। बजट डे का मार्केट ओपन, और देखते हैं किस तरीके की ओपनिंग। फर्स्ट रेट्स आपकी स्क्रीन पर आपको दिखाई देंगे। ये देखिए, सेंसेक्स करीब 168 पॉइंट्स ऊपर, निफ्टी 35 पॉइंट ऊपर है, मिड कैप इंडेक्स करीब 100 पॉइंट ऊपर, बैंक निफ्टी में करीब 100 पॉइंट की रैली इस समय आपको दिखाई देगी। उसके अलावा आप लेकर आइए स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स 2.5% ऊपर, स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स। एडवांस डिक्लाइन आपकी स्क्रीन पर 1368 बढ़ने वाले शेयर और 275 गिरने वाले शेयर। सबसे ऊपर निफ्टी ऑटो, जहां पर शानदार तेजी रही है लगातार, चाहे टाटा मोटर्स हो या मारुति हो, वहां पर रैली। मेटल्स फ्लैट है इस समय, मेटल्स में कोई मूव खास है नहीं इस समय। उसके अलावा आप देखिए एफएमसीजी इंडेक्स, यहाँ पर 0.1% का मूव। निफ्टी अब रेड में आ चुका है, फ्लैट है। फार्मा इंडेक्स भी फ्लैट, कोई खास मूव नहीं है यहाँ पर। मिड कैप रेड में आया। आईटी में आज अच्छी खासी डिक्लाइन है। आईटी इंडेक्स ऑब्वियसली नैस्डैक का इंपैक्ट शायद यहाँ पर, तो आईटी इंडेक्स करीब 1.5% नीचे। उसके अलावा रियल्टी इंडेक्स, यहाँ पर भी हल्की से डिक्लाइन दिखाई देगी आपको। ध्यान रखिएगा, आज निफ्टी की वीकली एक्सपायरी भी है बजट वाले दिन ही। ऑयल एंड गैस इंडेक्स करीब 0.5% ऊपर आपको काम करता हुआ दिखाई देगा। बीएससी पावर इंडेक्स करीब 2.5% ऊपर इस समय आपको काम करता हुआ दिखाई देगा। फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज इंडेक्स, यहाँ पर हल्की सी रैली करीब 0.18% की। पीएसयू बैंक इंडेक्स, यहाँ पर भी इस समय आपको रैली दिखाई देगी। चलिए क्विकली एक बार निफ्टी के गेनर्स, अच्छा एक बार पेटीएम देख लेते हैं पहले, उसके बाद हम निफ्टी गेनर्स लूजर्स पर आएंगे। अगर एक बार पेटीएम दिखा सके मुझे फटाफट। हाँ देखिए 20% नीचे। अब आप देखिए निफ्टी का हीट मैप आपकी स्क्रीन पर आपको दिखाई देगा। सबसे ऊपर बीपीसीएल, यहाँ पर एक अच्छी रैली करीब 2% ऊपर। आयशर मोटर्स, टाटा मोटर्स और महिंद्रा एंड महिंद्रा। ऑटोज का दिन, बजट का दिन भी है, थोड़ा ईवी फोकस की भी बात हो रही है। नंबर्स भी आ रहे हैं आज, सेल्स नंबर्स इन सबके, रिजल्ट्स भी अच्छे रहे हैं, तो इन सबका तड़का सारे के सारे टॉप गेनर्स। इनफैक्ट बीपीसीएल को छोड़ दें आप तो आयशर, टाटा मोटर्स, महिंद्रा, हीरो मोटोकॉर्प, मारुति सुजुकी, सब के सब ऑटो स्टॉक्स। उसके अलावा रिलायंस में डिसेंट पुल बैक है। एनटीपीसी ग्रीन में है, तो ऑब्वियसली पीएसयू का तड़का रहा ही है यहाँ पर। उसके अलावा आप देखें अगर लार्सन एंड ट्यूब,
downside before I go any further. Indus Tower is down 3%. There is, of course, that share sale which has been planned. We reported that 215 on Indus Tower. It'll be on your screen. There you go. So top is the number one volume traded name. Indiabulls Housing is down 11%. That's a very large move. And I think, they were doing about it just under 200 rupees on Indiabulls Housing. Shriram Finance, decent move after numbers 2 days back, 2% lower. Jubilant Food reported numbers yesterday. Numbers looked okay, but the stock's down about 3%, 503, 504. And of course, I think Lata mentioned Paytm, it's still down 20, but that's a temporary freeze. And I think it'll open up in a bit from now.
Prashant, Sonia is at the video wall. So, yeah. Sonia, if there anything more that you're spotting?
Well, Prashant has covered a lot of stocks, so I'll just avoid them. But just a couple of things to watch out for. Paytm, as we've been telling you, is down almost about 20-odd%. So that really is the big focus area. Apart from that, Shree Cement is the one that I'm looking at. The earnings were above estimates and the stock is doing pretty well this morning, up almost about 5.5%. Volumes are also picking up on Shree Cement. In fact, the metals and the cement space have been doing pretty well. So JSPL is the other one. Very strong Q3. Margins at 24.3% versus a pole of 19.3%. So look at JSPL now, about 0.5% higher. Now, I want to look at some of the budget-oriented stocks as well. There's L&T, there's ITC. L&T, there's an expectation that there will be a 12 to 15% growth in infra capex, so keep an eye out on that. ITC, any hike in excise duty will be negative for the company. And a couple of these result reactions as well. On Maruti, by the way, HSBC has a buy with a target price of 12,500. They say it was a stable quarter this time around for Maruti. There is some buying action that you're seeing over there. And green energy stocks is something that I'm focusing on as well. If there are any tax incentives for names like Tata Power, Adani Green, etc. Adani Green, well in the green right now, up about 1.5%. Back to you.
Okay, so clearly on the front foot on all those stocks. Thank you very much for pointing out that very helpful list, Sonia, which investors and traders should keep on their radar. Tahir Badshah, welcome to the show and thank you very much for waiting patiently. The first question really is to you on the budget itself. There are a lot of these green energy and generally infrastructure related expectations with the budget. Would you be on the front foot on any of these infrastructure or power stocks?
So, we have some positioning, of course, in some of these segments that you mentioned of the market. And I think Nilesh Bhai already alluded to the fact that, I mean, he almost stole my thunder when he summarized what are the expectations out of the budget. And I think it's very clear that, we want continuity of what is happening. And at the same time, we need to have additional levers for growth to be visible for calendar year 2024 and beyond. We've had the industrial and investment cycle lever, which has been working very well for the last 2-3 years. And it will remain to be seen as to, what is the intensity that we can maintain. This time around, I think the budgetary compulsions will probably be a little higher. Last 2 years, a little bit of looser fiscal was tolerable, given that we were passing through COVID-related conditions. I think, given the fact that we are up against, the MSCI bond inclusion, and in general, we have to kind of maintain, get back to the FRBM targets. I think this time around it'll probably be a little difficult. Let's see how much comes about in this vote on account. Or we might have to probably wait for the later part of this year. So I think continuity is most important, and we need to have additional levers, particularly at the bottom end of the pyramid. So that's something which will keep the market up. Otherwise, we might have some challenges.
Under that Nilesh stole when he said that the bottom of the pyramid needs income transfers. But so Nilesh, what you're saying is if the PM Kisan Samman Nidhi or something is raised to 8,000 or 10,000, that will be good. Populist this time is not negative. It's a positive. Is that what you're saying?
Undoubtedly, yes. This is an election year. We have to remember that. Second, 70% of India even today lives at sub-Saharan Africa level. We have to upgrade them. And third, we should also focus on improving productivity of our spending. The government has done a great job through Jan Dhan Mobile and Aadhaar Trinity to plug the leakages, which has expanded the coverage and also left resources for infrastructure investment. But now we should focus towards, apart from food, healthcare and education, which can lift these people permanently from bottom of pyramid. So there should be some more focus on how we are spending money, how we are providing subsistence in a manner that they are coming up on their own. Education and skilling will be the best way to upgrade a population from bottom of pyramid towards higher level.
By the way, the stock that is taking top honors right now is Godrej Consumer. Just look at that, almost 8% higher on that stock. It's been a solid operational performance, and it's a fresh 52-week high that Godrej Consumer is sitting at.
Nilesh, actually, it's very important because all the other FMCG companies, Hindustan Unilever and all, 2% volume growth.
Hardly anything.
This guy has produced 5% volume growth. So clearly, in the peer group, stands out in terms of performance.
Absolutely. And that was the point I wanted to get across to our viewer, that despite Godrej Consumer's performance being decent this time, the rural market is under a lot of pressure, right? And 35% of FMCG sales comes from rural India. Do you think there's anything in the budget that can be announced which would not just be a sentiment positive, but would actually put more money in the hands of rural India?
So probably, some of the conventional measures like expanding the outlay on Manrega, for example, that could be a potential driver. Deepening the overall financial inclusion program and ensuring that it reaches every rural household. I think that could be a key driver, and ensuring that whatever DBTs that we have been doing for a set of accounts, if that's further expanded, I think that is something which would leave more money in the hands of the rural households. The other thing is that it's probably not directly rural, but I think the continued focus on infrastructure built up. Last year, we've seen a 30% increase in outlay for infrastructure spending. infrastructure spending is now 3.3% of the GDP. If that's enhanced, that's going to create more employment, more jobs, more activity out there for rural households, which they can basically send back to their houses in the villages, and they be able to spend more. So I clearly believe that it's going to be a comprehensive set of measures which can potentially lift the spending power of the rural households.
Okay, Nilesh, just before you, we had some guests saying that, yes, all this is good. CapEx will be good, income transfer will be good, but everything is priced to perfection. So two-part question, do you think that we are running at, very rich valuations or adequate valuation? And secondly, where is your pocket of comfort?
So, Lata, I would agree that we are trading at very rich valuations. Yes, we are trading at premium to essentially the historical averages. We are trading at a premium, but so is the growth. This growth is quite phenomenal, the kind of growth that we're seeing, not just at the GDP level, the real GDP or the nominal GDP, but earnings growth is quite phenomenal. And we're seeing all-round vibrancy. This is not just about domestic consumption. This is not just about exports. It's not just about services. It's not just about infrastructure. It's all of them firing on all cylinders simultaneously, which is propelling growth. And as long as growth sustains, I don't think valuation should be a concern. The day growth slips, valuations will become a concern. So I think till then, I think it's best to keep riding.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to mention a few other stocks here because it's a very active screen. I mean, the index is absolutely flat, but look at, I mentioned Jubilant Food, but Westlife is selling off. I'm not sure if that's, just sentiment kind of impact here coming through. Scient is down it's pulling back about 3.5%. If you can have these names up. AB Capital is down 3%. Manappuram is down 2%. So, is it the NBFC, Paytm kind of broad shadow on some of these names? I'm not sure. Piramal Enterprises is down about 2.5%. Piramal, of course, reported numbers as well, and market did not like the numbers very much. MapMy India is down about 5% as well. So Amber is down about 3.5%, although Dixon, which reported numbers, is higher. So very, very extremely strong, vibrant kind of open is what we have.
We have to remember, Prashant, that we are in an ambience today in the last 12 hours of a global market that's not doing well. So there will be, I guess, that level of activity. But let me toss that to...
When is that stopped?
Sometimes it does. See, overall, we get back to the global, tango. But why not the expert answer that? Nilesh of Kotak, that question to you. How much should we worry about, or how will you parse the global occurrences, the FOMC statement, yesterday on our markets?
So one, FOMC statements were in line with market expectation. Market did expect rate cuts to begin in March earlier, but there were enough indication from Fed that this cycle is not happening in March. It may happen in May or June. So Fed did not surprise the market. It is saying it will be data dependent. Typically, when Fed starts cutting rates, US markets have witnessed a correction and emerging markets have witnessed higher flows. And more importantly, as Nilesh of Envision was saying, we are priced for perfection. But as long as we deliver on that perfection, as long as we deliver on that expectations, the ride should be fine. To some extent, we are benefiting from other self-goal, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Brazil's choice of a communist government, China's design on Taiwan, South Africa's strife. All these things are limiting choices for emerging market investors. And India continues to remain one expensive but preferred destination.
Well, higher for longer, right? But in a different context, Nilesh, in terms of valuations, valuations perhaps will stay rich. Tahir, good morning. I just want to talk about the PSU space with you because you actually have a PSU fund. And my colleague Hormaz actually looked at all the PSU funds out there in the market, and we sort of parsed through your holdings. NTPC, BEL, Coal India, State Bank of India, HAL are some of the biggest holdings as a percentage of your assets in that fund. I think the fund has got some 700 crores of AUM. All large caps. I mean, do you own some of these railway stocks as well? Have you gone down the list, or this is some of the big PSU names in some of the old economy sectors? How are you looking at this space now, Tahir?
So I think, Prashant, we've got a fair bit of coverage. I'm not we've not necessarily tried to kind of, get into every possible aspect of the PSU space, but I think we've got adequate, areas which to us make sense and probably have a somewhat more longer longevity as far as the business is concerned, and competitive advantages are strong. So that's the starting point. But for us, I mean, this strategy all along, we've been running this strategy now for more than a decade, and coming up to about 15 odd years. But point is that all along we've only had to kind of look at the strategy from a value standpoint. This was always supposed to be a cheap kind of strategy with dividend yield and so on and so forth. So it was positioned in that manner, and much of the time it was that. But I think this is the first flourish of growth that we are seeing, and now obviously we are compelled to look at this strategy and look at the space and PSUs in general as a growth-oriented strategy. We have to basically we are now at a stage where for us evaluating public sector companies is equivalent to evaluating any other private sector enterprise as well, with the same kind of lens. We have to look at the growth characteristics going forward, because valuations are no longer affordable, so to speak. So I think that is the change that has happened in this portfolio. We don't have a choice but to look at it from a growth orientation point of view. And as I said, that so long as if we can continue to see the thrust of the government in maintaining the overall capex intensity, continuity of the investment cycle, I think these areas can still do well. There is some area like PSU banks, etc., which probably might provide some value. And then there are always certain pockets and individual stocks which might appeal. But by and large, I think we don't have a choice but to now look at it from a growth standpoint versus a value standpoint earlier.
Okay, thanks a lot, gentlemen, for joining us. Tahir, Nilesh, thank you for being with us. Of course, we'll speak to you through the course of the day once the budget comes out and we need more analysis. But in the meantime, just watch out for infra, capex, power companies, all doing pretty well this morning, whether it's IRB Infra, PTC India, Suzlon Energy, Genus Power, that whole lot, IRDA as well, all well in the green. So maybe there's some expectations from this budget. But let's talk about Cummins as well. The numbers came out, and they were the company hopes to see a double-digit growth by the end of FY24. The margins were a beat. The revenues, though, were impacted a tad bit because of weaker export sales. But today we're, of course, going to talk about larger issues, which is the upcoming budget and what they can expect this time around. So we have the management joining on. Ashwath Ram, who's the managing director at Cummins, is with us. Mr. Ram, thanks a lot for joining in. This is expected to be an infra-led, capex-driven budget. If not now, then once the government, whichever government comes back to power. So from your industry and company standpoint, what are the key expectations? What would you need in order to boost your revenue growth?
Yeah, that's certainly correct that over the last 3 or 4 years, our company has been quite successful because of the continued spend in infrastructure. So as India aspires to become a 3 trillion and then a 5 trillion kind of economy, this cannot happen without a significant amount of expenditure in the building of roads, in the building of rail, metro. The entire power grid needs to be modernized, investments in new energy. So all of those kinds of areas are areas where companies like Cummins also stand to benefit. So we would like the government to continue this spend on infrastructure. Certainly the private capex is now slowly starting to creep up, and that is also going to help in the next few years. But the main investment that needs to continue without any slowdown is the investment in infrastructure. And we have seen that when countries like China or South Korea or even Thailand and Malaysia, when they did their spend on infrastructure, they didn't do it for 3 or 5 years. They continued it for a couple of decades. And that enabled them to set up a base for their economy to then keep building on. And that is what is required from the government to continue this growth in our GDP that we have seen for the last few years.
Extremely well argued, Mr. Ashwath Ram, that the capex thrust is not a matter of years, but decades. Specifically in the budget, is there something other than the capex number that you will watch out for? We just saw the government announce the reduction of duties on mobile components. in terms of tariffs, excise, any other policy measures, any expectations?
Certainly, we have an expectation that the FAME scheme, which is the incentive provided to launch products with new energy, things like electrification of buses, use of hydrogen fuel cells, etc., in mobility. I think the maturity of those products is going to take another almost a decade or so. And till then, the government needs to continue to incentivize some of those products so that investments are made in the country, the infrastructure for producing some of those components, etc., are created in the country. So we are looking forward to a FAME 3, and we look for hydrogen internal combustion engines as well as fuel cells in a larger proportion to be added in those schemes. Linked with that, we feel there needs to be some kind of GST subsidy for tighter emissions on fossil fuels, which means that India plans to become a zero carbon nation by 2070. Countries like the United States are going to be zero carbon by 2050. So but that is still 26 years away. So for 26 years, it's not that overnight one can switch to EVs or to hydrogen. There is a transition, and there needs to be incentives to help those companies which are making the air cleaner or reducing the pollutants in the system. I think it's in the pace of BS6 and CPCB4 plus, etc. It needs to continue on that path.
Yeah, I know. I take your point entirely. I mean, they've already been giving green power a lot of encouragement, and actually we're doing reasonably well in renewable power across targets. But your point is taken that let us use GST and all these tax incentives to encourage. Just final question, very interesting, you whetted my appetite when you said that private capex also has begun. Where are you noticing it?
See, what we are seeing is utilization seems to have gone up. So which means all throughout COVID, where utilization dropped to something like 25, 30, 40%, we are seeing factories getting utilized at greater than 70% as of now. And so as you launch new products or you start investing in newer technologies or newer items that you bring to the market, the investments to support those areas have started to slowly start creeping up. So I would say industry is starting to invest in newer equipment and better equipment to produce the modern goods. But I think it still needs the government to continue its thrust to change the scale of the economy before we see significant more capex from the private side start to come in.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot for joining us, and appreciate your thoughts here on CNBC TV 18. Let's do one thing. Let's cut across to Shireen Bhan, who's in conversation with the former CA, KV Subramanian. Shireen, over to you.
Well, guys, good morning, and thanks so much for joining us here on Budget 2024. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is going to be ready to present her 6th consecutive budget, creating history in a way. And, you know, we brought in Tarun Bajaj, the former Revenue Secretary, as our budget editor here last year. And it is my pleasure to have with us KV Subramanian, the former Chief Economic Advisor, joining us as budget editor today. You would have been in Parliament with the Finance Minister 2 years ago. Today, you're sitting here with us in the CNBC TV 18 studio. So thank you very much. Look, let's understand the context of this interim budget. It is the last budget of this term of the Modi government ahead of the general elections. We go into this budget with a feel-good factor. So the finance minister is going to be mindful of not wanting to change that mood. If you look at the review that the government has put out, it goes into the interim budget from a position of confidence, both as far as growth is concerned, as well on the fisc. So on balance, do you expect this budget to directionally signal what the government may or may not do if it were to be voted back to power, or do you think that there may be some new announcements this time around?
I think it'll be both. I think our viewers have to understand that this is a vote on account, and therefore what the government is really doing is essentially getting an approval from Parliament for spending for a few months till the actual budget.
But 2019 was a vote on account. Piyush Goyal delivered PM Kisan.
Yes. So my contention, and because I was at that time part of the government, I can tell you the two measures, PM Kisan was there, and there was actually a increase in the standard deduction. But as we discussed a couple of days back, PM Kisan to me was a very good move from an economic perspective. At that time, I had mentioned that, because if you take a farmer who, let's say, earns about 20,000 rupees a month, for that farmer, the 2,000 rupees a month is 10% of his income. That's a significant amount. And importantly, that amount for sure will come to him or her, right? Yeah. And that takes care of some of the left-tail risk and which will bring in investment. This paper by Pulak Ghosh and a PhD student from University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, have actually shown that that has indeed happened. So in some sense, it was a very good move from an economic perspective. Yes, it may have actually helped them garner votes, but I think that's beside the point.
So a higher allocation, given the consideration?
Yes. I would say that if we take into account the average inflation that has prevailed, about 5.5% over the last 5 years. So if you account for that in real terms, I think an increase of about 30% would be justified to keep the real amount the same. So anywhere about 8,000 rupees, 7,800 to 8,000 actually would be, in real terms would remain the same. And I think anything more than that would mean that they're actually giving more to take care of some of the left tail risk. And just to finish the thought, I think the other part you mentioned, which is the vision, I think that is something which one is likely to see. The Honorable Prime Minister has talked about Amrit Kal, the fact that the coming 25 years, I think, is a very important phase for India. I'm in the process of writing a book, India at 100, where actually, I resonate with those thoughts. Right. And therefore, I think a vision for how India is positioned now and how it will look to grow forward, I think would be something that will be very, very well justified.
I don't know if our viewers can see this, but KV Subramanian's got notes lined up on our budget table here. And of course, he's got his laptop as well, and he's been going over the numbers. As far as CapEx is concerned, and this has really been the big one as far as the government is concerned, in this interim budget, do you really expect a big number? Because that, I would imagine, would be left for July.
Yeah, just to respond to, you were remember, actually, I like responding with data and a lot of numbers. I think sometimes actually memory fails me, and so it's just useful to have them with me. So I think that point is well taken, that in a full budget, the capital expenditure amount actually specifying it makes sense, but in a vote on account, it's possible that that number may actually, maybe the Honorable Finance Minister may decide not to talk about it. Which may be the right thing to do, because capital expenditure, you need the outlay for the entire year, and therefore the actual number that we may want to note carefully would be when the full budget is presented.
That's right.
But I think a vision, and my humble submission would be that the push on capital expenditure that we've done post-COVID is something that should be continued. And I'm a firm believer that many of those comments,
the 30-35% kind of increase that we've seen, or do you believe that it will be tapered down?
Well, the way I look at it, actually, rather than looking at the number from a supply side perspective, 30-35%, I would rather look at it from the demand side perspective. If we look at our infrastructure, if we have to indeed become an advanced economy like the Honorable Prime Minister has envisioned, then our infrastructure has to be of the level of advanced economies. And that is basically the way I look at it from the demand side. And from my perspective, when we look at the fiscal math, I think the two most important numbers are we generating enough growth by investing that capital expenditure to make sure that the R-G differential is sufficiently negative to offset any primary deficit there will be. Those are the two numbers. If that is, I would not go by 30-35%. I would just go from the demand perspective, what we need to build in infrastructure, we should go ahead and provision for that.
And I'm speculating here, but what I heard from the Prime Minister, what we heard from the President in her speech, my gut tells me we're going to see a focus on women as far as this budget is concerned. Do you concur?
I think I would. In fact, the Honorable Prime Minister, as is his wont, he actually coined this acronym GYAN, right? Where G for Garib, Y for youth, and then A for the farmer, the Annadata, and N for Nari. So I think, of the 4 pillars, N is for Nari. So I'm sure, there'll be something for women, definitely. One aspect that I would definitely want to highlight, and the CA's report has clearly brought this to attention. The female labor force participation ratio has increased significantly, especially in the rural areas. And this is over a 5-year span from about 26% to 41%. And that is something which is not just because of women sort of joining their, let's say, the spouses at work. It is because their time is now getting saved. Now they are not having to spend as much time, cooking, because the LPG connections that have been given, they don't have to spend as much time maybe walking miles to get water. Right? All that has made them more productive, and therefore their household activities are taking less time, which is basically saving them time to be productive, at work as well. So I think that's a very good sign. To supplement that and just to push that further, I think a focus on women would be absolutely welcome.
PM Garib Kalyan has already been extended. It's happened outside of the budget. Even as far as the Ujjwala scheme is concerned, there has been tweaks and more sweeteners provided. Do you believe that could be something more on some of these existing social sector welfare schemes?
I reckon there may be some additional provision for the PM Awas Yojana, because again that ties in with the theme that I mentioned about capital expenditure. While of course infrastructure creation creates these big, huge assets for the nation, but PM Awas Yojana creates assets at the household level.
And more on the rural side, you think that's going to be the emphasis?
on the rural side. And from a household's perspective, I remember in 2000 when we had bought a house, my parents were so happy because for the first time we had a house to call our own. And therefore I can relate to actually people who want to have their own house. I think outlays increase in PM Awas Yojana would be something that I might expect.
Okay. Crunch time. What is the sense that in Parliament, when you were part of the finance minister's team, what's the last minute prep ahead of the budget speech?
Well, so I must actually remind, the first couple of times, the first time especially when I was part of, that cavalcade goes from the president's, Rashtrapati Bhavan to Parliament. I was like a kid in a candy store, enjoying that moment, and being able to see history being written, sort of written is, I think, for me, each occasion, I was part of 4 budgets. I had basically goosebumps every time. And, I think it's, of course, a privilege to be able to contribute to the nation. I just want to wish absolute good luck to ma'am for the budget.
6th budget, will Nirmala Sitharaman deliver a 6th? And what is it that you would be watching out for in terms of key numbers?
Well, as a cricket fan, I actually would like to see a 6th there, the 6th time. Chakka maro.
So the numbers that you're going to be watching out for? Fiscal deficit?
So yes, I think 3 numbers as we had discussed a couple of days back. I think the real growth number, my sense is 7%. I think for the budget projections, the nominal growth number matters far more, because that's how the tax projection is done, tax revenue and the non-tax, non-tax revenue as well. So GDP deflator, I would expect it to be about 4%. The time where there was basically a lot of sort of movement in the WPI inflation, 2 years back, it was going up very high and then negative last year. Some of that I think is behind us. So we can expect the deflator to be at the median of the 2 to 6% band at 4%, which would translate into nominal growth of about 11.3%. If we take a tax buoyancy, and I'm actually being very conservative here in the tax buoyancy that I'm assuming, and for the benefit of viewers, tax buoyancy, basically remove the jargon, it is just, if there's a 1% increase in GDP growth, what is the percentage increase in tax revenue? That's what tax buoyancy is. So if it is 1.2, then a 1% increase in GDP growth will translate into 1.2% increase in tax revenues. So if you multiply 11.3% by 1.2, you get about 13.5% as the. Now, the reason I'm saying this is conservative is if you look at the last 10 years, and I've actually looked at the data, the average tax buoyancy ratio has been about median and mean has been about 1.5 to 1.6.
Okay.
So 1.2 is very conservative compared to that. So 13.5% increase in revenue, that's the number I would be watching. The third number, which then implicitly leads to the fiscal deficit, is the change in the expenditure. And my sense is if the expenditure increases by about 8% or thereabouts, with a 13.5% increase in revenue, I think they'll be able to get a fiscal deficit of 5.2%, which will then be sort of a commitment to the fiscal consolidation path leading up to 4.5% for FY26.
Yeah, and as far as disinvestment, privatization, I don't imagine that this is going to be the budget that we hear anything more on that front.
Yes. No, this is one area where I think more needs to be done. Even when I was in the government, I used to sometimes actually mention this and bring this to the attention that even in my conversations with the secretary, I think we need to do more for sure. As you would recall, I'd written a chapter on privatization. So I am because that leads to a lot of productivity improvements. I'm all for it. But this is not the year that they will talk about it. I would expect
this is certainly not the budget that they will
talk about. It's not the budget, exactly. I think thanks for the correction. Yeah. Quite likely they'll talk about it in July, or end June or July when the budget for the new government comes in.
Okay, that is our budget editor KV Subramaniam with us at our budget headquarters in the capital. Of course, we are counting down to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's 6th budget. Markets are trading, and let me toss it back to you guys in the studio, and we'll join you again in a short while from now. Lata.
Thanks a lot for that, Shireen. Okay, we have another economist joining us now, Samiran Chakrabarti, the chief economist at Citibank. Also, Neeraj Gambhir of Axis Bank will be with us to tell us how the bond markets, what they're expecting and how things will go from here. But first to you, Samiran, how important is the fiscal deficit number? You're yourself going with 5.5. The market, the bond market today is pretty cheerful, 7.13 actually on the 10-year, decent rally in bond markets. Do you think 5.5 will ruffle feathers?
Well, I mean, this is only an interim budget, and we'll know about the final numbers in a few months' time. And this is also a very peculiar year when, because of the global bond index inclusion-related inflows, I think the market should focus less on the gross borrowing number this year, which is derived out of this fiscal deficit number. The only signal that people would try to get is whether that path towards the 4.5% by FY26, there is any risk to that path. As long as it is more or less assured that that path will be sacrosanct, I doubt that whether the number is 5.5 or a little higher, lower, it would make a